Marietta shares are up 45% since the bottom in March. I want to bring in the Chief Executive Officer and President. We've got Ward Nye joining us, the Chairman as well. Ward, great to have you here. I want to start by looking at the earnings, where your contraction in revenue was very small compared to much else in this market right now, only about 70 basis points lower than a year ago, but you still pulled the guidance. Walk me through why.
Well, if we're sitting here looking today, we still have some states that are slow to reopen. We've got phase 4 recovery after the pandemic that we believe may deal with infrastructure. We're also looking at a highway bill that expires on September 30th this year, and we're curious to see what that follow-up bill is going to be. We feel like it's going to be up, but there's still enough things that are in play that we felt like it was just safer to not put guidance back out. And in fact, that's really what you've seen across our industry as well. So I don't think that was a big surprise to anyone at this stage.
Well, how important is the highway bill to your business? Do you have contracts lined up in the works that are contingent on this? Does it have obvious ramifications for the bottom line?
It certainly does for the future. As we're sitting here today, Oliver, the backlogs are pretty good. So if you're looking at highways, bridges, roads, and streets, the backlogs that our contractors have certainly will carry them through the rest of the year. I think part of what's attractive right now is the highway bill that we're anticipating, we believe will be notably up. It's not a matter of whether this highway bill comes through, it's really a matter of when the highway bill comes through. Because if we're sitting here today looking at what the U.S. Senate has done, the Senate has proposed a new bill that's up almost 30% over the old bill. Equally, if we look at the House of Representatives, they're up over 40%. So we still have some work to do in the Congress. There's still going to be a conference to iron some of those details out. But we do feel like most likely next year, when a new full 5-year bill comes out, that it's likely to be up for the first time, notably in about 15 years.
While your company is in the category of industrials, it's much different in terms of the way the market has interpreted. And as we see through the data with the small change in revenue from a year ago, your share is doing a lot better than an airline, anything to do with travel, a lot of things also in the services side. Do you think the company can retain that stability and your industry retain that stability if the quarantine comes back eventually? Does the containment of activity make its way in to the construction business, or can you keep going about business whether or not states enforce quarantines? Can you socially distance and build roads and buildings?
Well, we've proven that we can, and that's where we've been so far through this pandemic. We've been deemed an essential business. And if we look at the numbers of our employees who've been stricken with COVID, it's very, very low. And where we have seen those instances, it's come in from the outside. So the policies, procedures that we put in place puts us, we believe, in a place that we very safely can continue to work. And to your point, part of what's striking about our business, Oliver, we've just had the most profitable half year in Martin Marietta's history. We also had the safest half year in Martin Marietta's history. I think a lot of that is due to the protocols we put in place. And part of what I'm impressed by is even when we went through the Great Recession, we were always profitable. We never cut a dividend. And I think that's one of the things that people really like about this business. This is a business where we tend to get pricing. We tend to be profitable. We tend to be a very safe business all the way through cycles. And I think it's important to note that's what we've built. We've been very intentional about building a business that we believe can cycle extraordinarily well, bring extra value in up markets, but also perform extraordinarily well in down markets as well.
I have to say it's the conclusion I came to as well, looking through all the data, looking at you next to your peers within the industry. There's a lot of companies where you pull up the comparison and things stand out. You don't stand out in any negative way. It looks about as stable as can be. The question, though, is if the economy continues to come under pressure, is there a threshold at some point, Ward, where the construction contracts do slow down? Is there a point where, let's say, commercial real estate is so overburdened with emptiness that they don't need any more buildings, that maybe residential buildings don't need to be built if the commercial ones are going to get turned into residential?
Well, the fact is, part of what we said in earnings last week is we thought for the next few quarters, it would likely soften a bit. We don't think that's going to be material. We certainly don't think it's going to be something that should concern people. We think we'll continue to get pricing. But I think to your point, Oliver, part of what makes us stand out that I think is different is where our business is located. We're principally a southeastern and southwestern business. And the primary driver of people needing building materials is where people are going, or what's happening with people at work. So here's some interesting stats for you to keep in mind. If we look at the decade that we've just finished, about 69% of housing in the United States was single family. If we look at the previous decade, about 80% of it was single family. We think we're in parts of the country, whether it's in Texas, Colorado, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, or others, where population trends will continue to come and play. The other thing that we've been very focused on, and I think if you look at our footprint, you'll get the sense of it, state fiscal condition is something that we've taken very much into account as we've gone through our long-term strategic plans. So we feel like, can you see certain cycles and certain slowing on occasion? We think that's entirely true. Do we think we positioned our business geographically, competitively, and otherwise to outperform in those? We believe so.
Are you planning to concentrate regionally in certain areas? As we've discussed this kind of exodus from urban cities, are there ways for Martin Marietta to kind of pivot, or do you already have the roots that you need outside of cities to build these new homes and to be a part of that trend?
Well, we think we're in very good places right now, but part of what we've been aiming to do is make sure that we're building our business in large mega regions across the United States. So if you look at the US today and you assume we have a population of somewhere between 280 million people and 300, and we say between now and 2050, we're going to have around 450 million people in the United States. 70% of those people will live in one of about a dozen different mega regions. And our view has been to focus on those mega regions and establish leading positions in those mega regions. So if we look at where we sit today versus where we were a decade ago, we had a 1 or 2 position in 65% of our markets a decade ago. Today we have a 1 or 2 position in 90% of those markets. In some of them a decade ago, we had no presence in whatsoever. So we believe we continue to grow our business both organically and inorganically. And we've been a leader in the consolidation of building materials, and we intend to keep doing that. We're actually one of the few US-based companies that are still in this industry in the United States, and we intend to build a business that's here to stay for a very long time.
Where do you have to be right now? You mentioned some of those areas, those super areas. Can you give me an example, 1 or 2? Like, where do you have to be as a builder right now?
Well, I'll give you 2 great examples. Number 1 is in Texas. So if you look at our business in Texas, we're totally within that big Texas triangle that's Dallas at the north, over to San Antonio south and west, back to Houston, and then closing the triangle. The I-35 corridor bisects that big triangle, and somewhere in the middle of that is Austin. And we also have a very attractive footprint there. Oliver, here's the way to think of it. There's many people that live on the I-35 corridor in Texas as there are that live in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And if you look at population inflows there, it's awfully powerful as well. Another good example, and this is one that I've referenced, that's indicating a market where we were not a decade ago, and we've got a leading position there now, is in Colorado up and down the I-25 corridor. That's a mega region. It's the smallest mega region in the United States, but the fastest growing. 85% of the population in Colorado lives up and down that mega region, and we have the leading position going from Fort Collins all the way to Pueblo, and a very attractive position in Denver. So again, back to the notion of where are people going, how are we positioned, and how do we continue to derive value in our business? This is a business that location dictates very disproportionately how you're going to do in the near term and the long term. And we've been focused on the where for a long time.
Okay, it sounds like open air and space, Texas, Colorado. Appreciate it, Ward. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you. Ward Nye is the Chairman, CEO, and President at Martin Marietta.